Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Hens. I'm reading to you Skylark. I sent chapters 1 through 3 to your parents' email and also to our Google Classroom. I read it out loud to everybody that was on our call on Friday. So I recorded the call, or I recorded our Google Meets, just the part that we read Skylark, chapters 1 through 3. So if you want to listen to that first, it's on your Google Classroom. It just says Skylark chapters 1 through 3. So now we're on chapter 4. And I have to read it from my computer because I lost my copy, but I have another one coming in the mail. Okay. Papa came back from town with letters from Maine, letters for all of us from Sarah's aunts, Harriet and Maddie and Lou. It was evening, the oil lamp bright in the kitchen, and Papa mended a bridle, Caleb leaning against him. I read the letter out loud. There was a storm, Aunt Maddie said, and the porch shingles went to sea. What does that mean, went to sea? Asked Caleb, interrupting me. It means that they blew into the sea, said Sarah with a smile. I began to read again. My hat went to sea too, the one with the bird on it. Caleb climbed up into Papa's lap. A real bird? Exclaimed Caleb. Stuffed, Caleb, said Sarah. Aunt Maddie will miss that hat. 2 inches of rain by the glass measure. I stopped reading, staring at the word rain. I looked up at Sarah, and she was watching Papa, her face touched by the light from the lamp. A glass? Asked Caleb. I tried to make Caleb stop talking. I didn't want Papa to think about rain. What does your letter say, Sarah? Asked Papa. Sarah shrugged. Just the weather, she said. Painting William's boat. Papa looked up at her. Read it, Sarah, he said. Sarah took the letter out of her pocket, slowly opened it. The grass is green, she read, growing so tall that we've cut it down a dozen times already. The trees are lush. Autumn will be beautiful. Come visit, all of you, soon. Love, Maddie. There was silence in the room. Then Papa kissed Caleb and got up. He stood at the door, looking out at the red of the setting sun. It will be a beautiful sunset tonight, he said, his voice low. I can tell. Papa opened the door and went outside. A glass to measure rain? Asked Caleb again, still thinking of Maddie's letter. Hush, Caleb, I said. Sarah didn't answer Caleb. She put her letter on the table, walked to the door, and went outside. I picked up the letter. There was more that Sarah hadn't read. It has rained nearly every afternoon, Maddie had written. It cools down the day and leaves with us with good nights for sleeping. I watched Sarah put her hand on Papa's arm as he stood looking over the dry fields. My eyes filled with tears. I knew Sarah was sorry about the letters from Maine and the talk of rain. It's not your fault that Maine is green, Sarah, I thought. It isn't. It was dark and the moon was up when Caleb came in from outside. Nick was with him. Sarah looked up from her book. Caleb, I thought you'd gone to bed a long time ago, she said. I had something to do, he said, for Papa. Sarah smiled and put her arm around him. Well, off to bed now. It's late, both of you. Caleb yawned and went up the stairs. Sarah went out to the porch. Papa came across the yard from the barn, and he stopped suddenly, then looked at Sarah. On the fence post between them was a small glass, sitting empty in the moonlight, waiting for rain. Roses grew on the fence when Sarah came, and the fields were filled with wildflowers. I learned to float in the cow pond, and Caleb ran with the sheep in the green fields. Now clouds come and go, and the hot winds too. But there is no rain for the roses. Dirt from the fields blow over everything, and the leaves have crumbled like dust. Joshua said when he took our picture, like dust. Chapter 5. Each day, Papa dropped a rope with a stone down the well to measure the water level. Is it past the mark? Asked Sarah. Papa nodded. How much, Jacob? Papa held out his hand a foot apart. Caleb and I got up into the wagon to go to town. Soon we'll have to haul water for the animals, said Papa. We can do that, said Sarah. We'll have to measure out our own water, said Papa as he climbed up. But we already do that, Jacob. Papa looked down at Sarah. We'll have to use less. Sarah stared at Papa, then got up to sit next to him. We can do that too, she said firmly. We drove off down the road. After a while, Caleb poked his head between Sarah and Papa. Papa looked at him. So, Caleb? I put the glass on the post, said Caleb. Papa nodded but didn't say anything. To measure the rain when it comes, Caleb added. Thank you for that, said Papa. You're welcome, said Caleb happily. He sat back in the wagon and folded his arms, and Papa smiled. All the way to town, I looked for green, but as far as I could see, the fields were brown. The wheat fields were dry. Turkey vultures circled in the distance. There was no green. Everything seemed slow in town, as if the heat had taken over. Papa left the wagon in the shade of the granary and slowly unloaded his last bags of grain from the wagon. Slowly he walked inside. Mrs. Parkley's store was cool. Rose and Violet were there, Rose carrying Tom, who smiled at me. But Maggie had her arms around Caroline, who was crying. Caroline, what's wrong? Maggie, said Sarah. Their well is dry, Maggie said. Caroline, said Sarah, what can we do? There's nothing to do, Caroline said, drying her tears. We've already packed up. Packed up, said Sarah, shocked. Well, where will you go? They have families, said Maggie. Caroline took her packages and went to the door. She turned suddenly, her face sad. Joseph says we'll come back, she said, but we won't. I just know it. She opened the door and left, and Maggie walked over to the door and looked out. Surely we can do something, Sarah said. We could haul water, Maggie. We could all work harder. Sarah's voice grew louder, and Caleb moved closer to me. You can't just give up, said Sarah. You can't just give up everything you've worked for. Maggie whirled around, her face angry. You don't know how hard this is, Sarah, she said angrily. You haven't been in this kind of trouble before. Sarah stared at Maggie, then at the others in the store, and Maggie reached over and took Sarah's hand. She opened the door and pulled her outside. I watched the two of them cross the dusty street. Maggie's arm went around Sarah, but they kept walking. Papa came out from the granary and watched them too, Matthew beside him. Is Sarah angry? Asked Caleb. I looked down at his worried face. No, I said, Sarah's not angry. Caleb sighed. Sarah likes to make things right, he said. We watched without speaking, and then Joseph and Caroline's wagon passed, all packed with chairs and clothes and a cupboard, pots and pans tied on. Sarah turned to watch it, and Papa watched too, from across the street, and then the wagon turned a corner and was gone. Chapter 6. The ride home from town was quiet, the wind blowing dust around us. Any news in town? Asked Sarah wearily. Some news, said Papa. Good news? Good news? What's good news? Well, your birthday's coming soon. Maddie wrote to remind me. She didn't. She did, said Papa. So, what do you want? Jewels, silk, travel? Sarah laughed. Travel? Where would I go, Jacob? Somewhere green, said Papa. Somewhere cool. Sarah looked at Papa. Do you think I would leave? Asked Sarah softly. Papa was silent. Can we sing, Sarah? Asked Caleb. It's too hot, Caleb, she said. Too hot for singing. Papa flicked the reins over the horse's back, but they wouldn't go faster. It's even too hot for Jack and old Bess, he said. I leaned back against the empty grain sacks and took out my journal, but it lay on my lap. Caleb moved close to me. Why aren't you writing? There's nothing new to write, I said, lifting my hair off my neck. There's nothing good, just the heat. The fields are dried up and there's no rain. There will be rain, said Caleb. Papa said so. He pointed. That was the field where the wildflowers grew, remember? When Sarah came, the pond was full then, and we went swimming and fell asleep in the grass. I stared at Caleb and then out at the fields, remembering when the fields were green, remembering when the days were cool, remembering when Sarah came by train and Caleb and I were afraid that she'd miss the sea. Suddenly, Caleb stood up. Papa! Fire! In the west meadow, a thread of smoke rose. Hold on, yelled Papa. Sarah dropped to the wagon floor, and we held on to the horses as they raced for the yard. Papa jumped down. Soak the grain sacks in the pond water. Hurry. See, we could see red flames in the dry grasses now. Caleb and I soaked the sacks, then ran closer to the fire, water dripping down our clothes. Stay back, warned Papa. There's wind coming up. Nick and Lottie ran from the barn barking, and then suddenly Sarah screamed. Her skirt was on fire. Papa turned and threw Sarah to the ground and smoked and smothered the flames with a sack. He pulled her up. Are you all right? When Sarah nodded, Papa began to shout at her. I told you to stay back. You never listened. I told you there was a wind. Caleb took my hand. Sarah began beating the fire now nearly out. You can't put out the fire alone, she shouted, so stop yelling at me. And then there was only smoke. The grass is all black and smothered. Papa beat at one small flame. He stood back and there was silence. Nick and Lottie stopped barking. We'll have to watch for fires all the time now, even at night, said Papa out of breath. Sarah and Papa began walking back to the house. Sarah's hair was down. Her clothes were wet and sooty. Papa looked at her and then away. You're a sight, you know, he said softly. Sarah didn't answer. Papa looked at her again and then smiled. You look beautiful, he said. I held my breath. I had never heard Papa say such a thing to Sarah. Sarah kept on walking, and then she turned and looked at him. Do you really think I would leave, she said, just for somewhere cool, somewhere green? This time Papa was silent. The two of them walked away from the blackened grass, past the dogs and past us, just as if we weren't there. And that night, when Papa went out to close the barn door, Sarah ran after him. I saw them from my window. Papa took Sarah in her arms and kissed her. And they turned around and around and around, dust swirling over them in a cloud. My dreams are cool. They are cool and the color of the sky before rain, a dark and peaceful blue. The clouds edged in black before the rain comes, and the earth smells sharp and sweet. I remember that smell. The days are hot and still now, and only my dreams are cool. So that's chapters 4, 5, and 6. So I'll be reading 7, 8, and 9. I believe I'll have them ready by Tuesday morning for you. I know that some of you are interested in also seeing the movie because there is a sequel movie to Sarah Plain and Tall called Skylark. So that'll be fun to watch at the end of this book. We will be reading this book a little bit faster because we only have 2 weeks of schoolwork left. And so at the end of the 2 weeks, you'll get to watch the movie Skylark, which I'll send to you on Google Classroom. All right, boys and girls, I hope you had a great weekend. And I won't be seeing you tomorrow. We have a Google Meets on Wednesday at 10 a.m. And I'm hoping that by just having one a week, that we can get everyone, a lot of kids on Wednesday. And then hopefully next week we can finish off with having a few more sessions during the week, okay? Miss all of you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.